The air in Kunluang Somchai's compound hung thick and still, heavy with the scent of damp earth from the nearby Klong and the cloying sweetness of decaying jasmine blossoms. It was the scent of faded grandeur, a perfume Mali, barely a year into her marriage, found increasingly suffocating. Her own family's wealth, built on shrewd Sino-Thai merchant acumen, felt vibrant, alive, a stark contrast to the quiet crumbling of this noble house. She smoothed the deep emerald silk of her skirt, the fine material a testament to her dowry, not her husband's fortunes. How long, she wondered, tracing the intricate pattern of a carved teak screen, could ambition breathe in air thick with the dust of forgotten glory? Her husband, Kun Penit, was likely lost in the haze of an opium den or the raucous energy of a cockfighting pit, frittering away what little remained of the family name along with its dwindling coins. He possessed the languid grace of his lineage, but none of its purported strength, his energies reserved for pleasure, not duty. And Mali, daughter of merchants who understood the vital importance of legacy, of continuity, felt the weight of inaction settle upon her like the humid Bangkok air. Her marriage had been strategic, her family's gold for his family's name. But a name alone could not fill rice bowls, nor could it guarantee the respect she craved, the security she needed. She was 21, beautiful by any standard, her sharp intelligence gleaming behind eyes that missed little. Yet trapped in this gilded cage, her worth felt measured solely by the potential heir she had yet to conceive. Her mother-in-law, Kunying Pranom, moved through the house with the serene dignity of a woman accustomed to deference, yet her polite inquiries about Mali's health held an edge of anxious expectation. Kunying Pranom clung to tradition and status with fierce tenacity, seeing Mali less as a daughter-in-law and more as a vessel for the family's revival. The compound, sprawling yet subdued, housed not only the family but also various retainers and artisans. Among them was Chatri, a con mask-maker and dancer of uncommon skill. He worked quietly in a shaded corner near the servants' quarters, his hands strong and sure, coaxing expressive life from wood and lacquer. There was a quiet dignity about him, a contained energy that drew Mali's notice, if only as a contrast to her husband's dissipation. And then there was Pim, a gentle, distant cousin of Pinit's family, serving as a companion to Kunying Pranom. Pim moved with a shy grace, her kindness uncomplicated, her admiration for Chatri's artistry open and innocent. Mali felt a flicker of something akin to warmth for Pim's simplicity, a brief respite from the compound's undercurrents of decay and expectation. But warmth was a luxury ambition could ill afford. The turning point arrived not with a crash, but with a whisper, potent and chilling. Kunying Pranom, her face alight with desperate hope, returned from consulting a renowned morph, a spirit medium whose pronouncements were whispered about in temples and markets alike. The morphe, eyes clouded with otherworldly sight, had spoken of the Somchai lineage, of its flickering flame. But there was a chance, a prophecy delivered amidst the smoke of incense and the murmur of chants. A son, Kunying Pranom relayed, her voice trembling with conviction, conceived during the lustral rites, under the full moon of Loi Krathong, will carry the river's blessing. He will restore the family's fortunes, his path illuminated by the merit of the water spirits. The words hung in the air, heavy as unshed rain. For Kunying Pranom, it was divine assurance. For Mali, it was a decree, a deadline etched onto the lunar calendar. The pressure, already a constant weight, intensified tenfold. Every polite smile from her mother-in-law, every glance from the older servants, seemed to hold the echo of the prophecy. Loi Krathong, the festival of lights floating on water, a time to cast away misfortunes, was less than a month away. It became Mali's singular focus, a confluence of spiritual hope and calculated opportunity. As the festival approached, Kun Pinit remained true to form. He spoke vaguely of attending ceremonies, but his nights were spent elsewhere, returning near dawn smelling of cheap whiskey and sweat. Mali watched him stumble through the corridors, his aristocratic features slack, his eyes dull. Contempt warred with a chilling pragmatism within her. He was not merely inadequate, he was an obstacle. The family's revival, her own security, rested not on him, but on the prophecy. And the prophecy demanded a conception during Loi Krathong. She began to observe Chatri more closely. His quiet dedication to his craft, The inherent strength in his posture as he practiced con movements, the focused intensity in his eyes, it all stood in stark contrast to Pinit's languor. He was of lower status, an artisan, but he possessed a vitality her husband lacked. He was discreet, respectful, unlikely to gossip or make demands. He worked near the clong that bordered the compound. The pieces began to align in Mali's mind, forming a plan that felt both terrifying and necessary. She rationalized it. This was not about desire, but about duty, about survival, about fulfilling a sacred mandate the heavens themselves seemed to endorse. The river's blessing required proximity to the river. The prophecy required a son. Pinit would not provide one. The conclusion felt stark, unavoidable. She would secure the family's future, her future herself. Current part characters, 319. Total characters, 6,305. Loy Krathong arrived on a wave of humid heat, the night air thick with the scent of night-blooming flowers and the smoke from countless celebratory firecrackers across Bangkok. The full moon hung like a polished silver coin in the inky sky, its light shimmering on the dark, sluggish waters of the Klong. Elaborate krathongs, fashioned from banana leaves and adorned with flowers, incense, and candles, drifted downstream, carrying away the misfortunes and prayers of the city. Within the Somchai compound, the atmosphere was subdued. Kunying Pranam prayed fervently before the family shrine, while Pinit, after a brief appearance, had vanished again. Mali, dressed in exquisite pale blue silk, walked towards the compound's private landing on the Klong. She carried her own krathong, a beautiful creation of folded leaves and white orchids. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped within the cage of her composure. She saw Chatri near the water's edge, packing away some tools by the moonlight. He looked up, surprised to see her there alone. He offered a respectful way. "Kun Mali," he murmured, his voice low. "Chatri," she began, her voice carefully pitched to sound slightly distressed. "My candle, it keeps extinguishing, and Kun Pinit is indisposed. Could you possibly assist me? I wish to make my offering correctly for the family's fortune." It was a flimsy pretext, but plausible enough. He hesitated only a moment, then nodded. "Of course, Kun Mali." He approached, his movements economical and precise. As he knelt to relight the candle on her krathong, shielding the flame with his hand, Mali moved closer. The scent of wood shavings and clean sweat clung faintly to him. The moonlight sculpted the planes of his face, highlighting a strength Pinit could never possess. "The Morphai's words weigh heavily," she whispered, letting a calculated vulnerability seep into her tone. "So much depends on this night, on the river's blessing." She let her hand brush his as she adjusted a flower. He stiffened slightly but didn't pull away. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Malay didn't retreat. Looking directly into his surprised eyes, she leaned closer, her intent unmistakable. This was not seduction born of passion, but a deliberate act of will, fueled by desperation and the perceived mandate of prophecy. Chatri, caught off guard, perhaps awed by her station, perhaps simply overwhelmed by the suddenness of it, offered little resistance. Under the auspicious gaze of the Loy Krathong moon, beside the water meant to carry away sins, Malay orchestrated the conception she believed would save them all, sealing a silent, dangerous pact in the humid Bangkok night. Afterwards, she simply murmured a thank you for his help with the krathong, turned and walked back towards the shadowed house, leaving him standing alone by the water's edge, the flickering lights of distant krathongs reflecting in his stunned eyes. Weeks later, the subtle changes in her body confirmed what Mali already suspected. She was pregnant. A wave of profound relief washed over her, so potent it almost brought tears. The prophecy was being fulfilled. She had done it. She had secured the future. Kunying Pranom's discreet joy was palpable, her solicitousness increasing. Even Pinit seemed vaguely pleased, though likely more at the prospect of familial approval than paternal feeling. But relief was a shallow pool, quickly disturbed by the ripples of anxiety. The secret sat within her, heavy and alive as the child growing there. Every time she saw Chatri, her composure felt brittle. He remained respectful, quiet, his gaze never lingering, yet his very presence was a constant reminder of the Loy Krathong night. She found herself watching him, analysing his interactions, searching for any sign that he might betray their secret. It was then she began to notice Pim. The young companion's interactions with Chatri, once dismissed as innocent admiration, now took on a different hue in Mali's increasingly anxious mind. A shared smile over a newly carved mask, Pim lingering near his workspace to ask about Khan's stories, her gentle praise for his skill. Malay saw not innocence but intimacy. Perhaps it wasn't romantic, not yet, but it was a connection. A potential confidant for Chatri. A place where the secret might slip out, inadvertently or otherwise. Fear, cold and sharp, began to curdle within Mali. It wasn't jealousy in the conventional sense. She felt no romantic attachment to Chatri. It was something more akin to possessiveness born of shared transgression, coupled with the terrifying fear of exposure. If the truth ever surfaced, her carefully constructed world, her position, her son's legitimacy, her family's honor, would shatter. Chatri was a loose thread. Pim, in her trusting simplicity, was the needle that could unravel everything. They had to be removed. The decision solidified with chilling clarity. Her merchant upbringing had taught her pragmatism, the sometimes brutal necessity of cutting losses and eliminating risks. Her fear warped Pim's gentleness into a threat, Chatri's quiet dignity into potential defiance. She began to formulate a plan, her mind working with the cold precision she usually reserved for assessing business deals. She needed leverage, a tool. She thought of Luang Decha, a minor official known for his greed and flexible morals, someone her father had occasionally dealt with. A carefully placed bribe, a whispered accusation, it could be arranged. She retrieved a valuable antique hairpin, a gift from her own family, its jade and gold gleaming ominously in her hand. This would be the evidence. The price of security, she told herself, was sometimes steep, requiring sacrifices. She hardened her heart against the image of Pim's trusting eyes, against the memory of Chatri's quiet skill. Survival demanded ruthlessness. Mali moved with calculated discretion. A private meeting was arranged with Luang Decha away from the Somchai compound, in a discreet tea-house near the bustling Samfeng market. She presented her request coolly, laying out the scenario: theft of a valuable hairpin, suspicion falling upon the artisan Chatri, and perhaps unfortunate implications for the young woman, Pim, who seemed overly familiar with him. The glint in Luang Decha's eyes confirmed his understanding and his price. Mali handed over a heavy pouch of silver baht, the coins clinking softly, sealing the sordid bargain. The execution was swift and brutal. Luang Decha, citing an anonymous tip, orchestrated a search of the servants' quarters and workshops within the Somchai compound. The hairpin was discovered among Chatri's tools and meagre belongings. Simultaneously, insidious whispers, likely originating from sources paid by Decha, began circulating about Pim's inappropriate closeness to the artisan, twisting her innocent admiration into something shameful. Chatri was summoned before Kun Luang Somchai, Pinit's father, frail but still the household head, and Luang Decha. He stood tall, denying the theft vehemently, his eyes flashing with disbelief and outrage. But his word, the word of an artisan, held little weight against the planted evidence and the official's pronouncements. Kunying Pranom looked away, perhaps suspecting something amiss, but choosing willful ignorance in favour of household peace and the promise of her grandchild. Pinit was, predictably, absent. Chatri was declared guilty. As punishment for theft and disrespecting the household, he was flogged publicly in the outer courtyard, a humiliation designed to break his spirit, and then banished from Bangkok, forbidden to return under penalty of severe punishment. Mali watched from a shaded window, her face impassive, her knuckles white where she gripped the sill. Pim's fate was quieter, but no less cruel. Though not formally accused of theft, the cloud of scandal expertly fanned by rumour clung to her. She was deemed a source of impropriety, her reputation ruined. Kunying Pranom, eager to excise any hint of unpleasantness, arranged for Pim to be sent away immediately. Not back to her own family, who would also feel the shame, but to live with impoverished, distant relatives in a remote village up-country, effectively silencing her and erasing her from their lives. Pim left the compound weeping, bewildered and disgraced, carrying nothing but a small bundle and the weight of accusations she didn't understand. Mali saw her go, a small, hunched figure disappearing down the path. A sharp pang, unexpected and unwelcome, pierced Mali's cold resolve. She pushed it down. It was done. The threats were neutralized. Months later, Mali gave birth to a son. He was healthy, alert, with bright, intelligent eyes. Kunying Pranam wept with joy, declaring the Morphe's prophecy fulfilled. The child was named Ananda, meaning joy. As Mali held her son, the architect of her secured future, the image of Pim's tear-streaked face flashed before her eyes. The joy felt hollow, tainted. The price had been paid, but the debt, she suspected, would linger. Current part characters, 3,989. Total characters, 17,026. The years flowed by like the sluggish waters of the Cow Fryer River, carrying away the sharp edges of memory, but leaving behind a deep, persistent sediment of guilt in Mali's soul. Outwardly, the prophecy held true. Ananda grew into a fine young man, sharp-witted and diligent, possessing the business acumen of his mother's family rather than the indolence of his official father's. He showed a keen interest in trade and administration, gradually helping to restore the Somchai family's depleted coffers and social standing. Kun Penit faded further into the background, a ghost haunting the edges of their revitalized lives, while Kunying Pranam basked in the reflected glory of her grandson, the living proof of her faith. Mali became the respected matriarch of the reviving household. She managed the finances with shrewd skill, oversaw the staff with quiet authority, and moved in society with impeccable grace. She was admired, perhaps even envied. Yet beneath the veneer of calm competence, the past remained an unquiet presence. She found herself making increasingly large anonymous donations to remote temples, particularly those known for aiding destitute women. She developed insomnia, often waking in the dead of night, the silence amplifying the echo of Pim's weeping, the imagined sting of the lash on Chatri's back. Though proud of Ananda's achievements, a subtle distance remained between them, an invisible barrier forged from her secret. Sometimes Ananda would ask about the family's past, about the artisan who used to carve masks, or the quiet cousin who served his grandmother. Mali would offer vague, dismissive answers, changing the subject quickly, her heart clenching with familiar anxiety. She had tried, through discreet inquiries, to learn of Pim's fate, but the news was always fragmented, unsettling, whispers of hardship, illness, and then silence. Nearly 20 years had passed since that fateful Loi Krathong. Ananda was now a man, poised to take a significant position, perhaps even one within the royal household, thanks to careful cultivation of contacts and his own evident capabilities. To celebrate a recent success, the family attended a grand ceremony hosted by a high-ranking noble, a glittering affair showcasing the pinnacle of Bangkok society. Part of the evening's entertainment was a traditional con performance featuring dancers from a renowned royal troupe. Mali watched, appreciating the artistry, the elaborate costumes, the masks that both concealed and revealed emotion. The lead dancer, portraying the noble monkey king Hanuman, moved with extraordinary power and grace. His skill was breathtaking, holding the audience captive. The mask he wore, depicting Hanuman's fierce loyalty and strength, was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, intricate and soulful. Mali felt an inexplicable pull, a disturbing flicker of familiarity. During a dramatic pause in the performance, the dancer portraying Hanuman stood center stage, momentarily still. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached up and removed the magnificent mask. The collective gasp of the audience was drowned out by the roaring silence in Mali's own ears. Staring back across the opulent, crowded hall, his face older, marked by experience but radiating a commanding presence, was Chatri. He was no longer the quiet artisan from the compound yard. Success and resilience were etched onto his features. He had not only survived his banishment, but had clearly honed his twin crafts, carving and dancing, to achieve recognition at the highest level. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second across the glittering expanse. Recognition flared instantly in both their gazes, a silent acknowledgement of a shared past, buried but not forgotten. Chatri's expression held no accusation, no overt emotion, merely a calm, steady acknowledgement before his gaze swept onward, resuming his role in the performance. The shock rooted Mali to her seat, her blood running cold. He was alive. He was here. He had thrived. A complex mix of emotions warred within her, astonishment, a flicker of fear, and something else, something indefinable. Just as she struggled to regain her composure, a trusted elderly servant, one who had been with the Somchai family for decades, and occasionally brought Mali discreet news from outside, leaned close. The servant, perhaps sensing the moment's gravity, or perhaps merely delivering long-delayed information, whispered words meant only for Mali's ear. Kun Mali. News came some weeks ago through distant family channels about Kun Pim. They say she passed away several years back, alone in that village near Sukhothai. From illness and hardship, they say. There was no one. The whisper faded, but the words struck Mali with the force of a physical blow. Pim was dead. Dead from disgrace, poverty and loneliness, the direct consequences of Mali's calculated cruelty born of fear. Chatri's impossible return, his evident success, threw Pim's tragic fate into devastatingly sharp relief. His survival didn't erase Pim's suffering, it amplified it. It underscored the brutal truth. Mali had destroyed an innocent life to protect her secret, her ambition. The con performance continued, a whirl of colour and myth, but Mali saw none of it. The sounds of the audience, the music, the dancers, all faded into a dull roar. She sat perfectly still, the image of Chatri's face superimposed over the memory of Pim's weeping departure. One had survived, even flourished, perhaps through sheer talent and will, perhaps through the turning wheel of karma. The other had been utterly consumed. The ceremony eventually concluded. Guests mingled, exchanging pleasantries and congratulations. Ananda, flushed with success and oblivious to the internal earthquake that had just shattered his mother's composure, came to her side. "Mother, wasn't the performance magnificent? Especially Hanuman?" Mali forced a smile, a brittle approximation of maternal pride. "Indeed, son, truly remarkable." Her voice sounded distant, disconnected even to her own ears. She allowed Ananda to lead her through the departing crowds, nodding politely to acquaintances, her face an impassive mask perfected over 2 decades. As they passed near the area where the performers were gathering their things, her eyes briefly met Chatri's again. He inclined his head slightly, a formal, impersonal gesture of respect one might offer any high-ranking guest. There was no lingering glance, no hint of shared history in his public demeanour. He had moved on, encased in his success and perhaps his own form of peace or detachment. The carriage ride back to the Somchai compound was silent. Ananda spoke enthusiastically about the evening, about future prospects, but Mali offered only monosyllabic responses. The revitalized house, usually a source of quiet satisfaction for her efforts, felt alien and cold upon their return. She dismissed her servants and retired to her chambers, the heavy teak door closing behind her like the lid of a coffin. She stood before the ornate mirror, gazing at her reflection. The woman staring back was undeniably successful. The respected wife, the mother of a rising star, the mistress of a restored noble house. Her silk gown shimmered, jewels glittered at her throat. By all external measures, she had won. The prophecy was fulfilled, the family name secured, her position unassailable. But the reflection couldn't hide the hollowness in her eyes, the deep, indelible lines of guilt etched around her mouth. Chatri's survival offered no absolution. It only served as a stark, living contrast to Pim's lonely death. Pim, who had admired Chatri's art. Pim, who had offered Mali simple kindness. Pim, whose life Mali had sacrificed on the altar of her own fear and ambition. The weight of that sacrifice settled upon her, heavier than any jewel, more suffocating than the Bangkok humidity. There would be no dramatic confession, no public downfall. Her secret was likely safe forever, buried with Pim in some unmarked corner of a remote village, shielded by Chatri's detached success. Her punishment was not external, but internal, inescapable. It was the knowledge she would carry every day for the rest of her life. The knowledge of the price paid, the collateral damage inflicted, the ineradicable stain on her soul. The joy Ananda represented was forever intertwined with the sorrow of Pim's fate. This, she understood with devastating clarity, was her true karma, her inescapable companion. The river's blessing had been secured, but the river also carried away innocence, and its currents ran deep with the memory of irreversible sin. Her repentance would not be found in grand gestures at temples, but in the silent daily endurance of this crushing weight. Mali lived out her remaining years enveloped in outward prosperity and inward austerity. She continued to manage the household affairs with meticulous care, guiding Ananda's career with shrewd advice and maintaining the impeccable facade of the dignified matriarch. The Somchai name regained much of its former luster, largely due to Ananda's diligence and Mali's careful stewardship of their renewed wealth. She hosted gatherings, attended ceremonies, and played her part in the intricate dance of Bangkok society flawlessly. Yet, those closest to her, particularly Ananda, sometimes sensed a profound melancholy beneath the surface, a reserve that bordered on detachment. He attributed it to the burdens of responsibility, the quiet grief perhaps for her own lost youth, or the husband who eventually faded completely into insignificance before passing away quietly. He never suspected the true source of the shadow in his mother's eyes. Mali's private life became increasingly devoted to acts of quiet atonement. Her anonymous donations to temples and charities supporting impoverished women grew larger. She spent more time in quiet contemplation, not seeking forgiveness. She felt her actions were beyond that, but seeking perhaps to balance the cosmic scales in some small way, to alleviate the suffering of others, as she could not alleviate Pim's. She never sought out Chatri again, nor did he seek her out. Their paths might cross occasionally at state functions or artistic events, but they remained distant figures in each other's orbits, bound only by a silent, unacknowledged history. His success became a quiet fixture in the city's cultural life, a constant, living reminder. She found herself drawn to depictions of Framaitharani, the earth goddess wringing water from her hair to drown the forces of Mara. Malay felt an